All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Alternate Careers in Science breakout session. My name is Catherine Evans. I'm Chief of the Science Communication and Digital Outreach Branch at NIDCR, and I'm also one of today's panelists. We have a distinguished group of panelists today to talk to you about their careers. So the way that we'll go about this session today is that each of us will take a few minutes to introduce ourselves and to describe our career paths, including what inspired us to pursue careers outside of traditional academia, how we got to where we are now, and any advice we might have for those of you who might be considering a non-academic career. And then after each of us have spoken, for a few minutes, we'll open the session up to an informal Q&A where everyone will have a chance to chat with the panelists and ask questions. And so I'll be keeping track of the time to ensure that we stay on schedule. We will be kicked out of this room at approximately 4:20, I believe. And so before we get started, are there any questions from anyone in the audience? Or any of the panelists? Okay, so with that, why don't we have Dr. Chalmers start off?
Thank you. I will be also very happy if someone else takes this, the first introduction. But okay, I guess this is the new group. Hi everyone, pleasure to be here. It's so wonderful to be back at NIDCR for this trainees event. I was right where you are today. Exploring opportunities. I remember being, participating in these panels, trying to learn about careers in dentistry. Very briefly about me, I received my dental degree from the Medical University of Sofia. And one distinct aspect of my dental training is that we had to complete a succinct medical school curriculum. So we did the cardiology, dermatology, all of the medical specialties, something that actually serves me today very well. I then did a PhD in oral microbiology, and that was through a creative partnership between the University of Maryland and NIDCR. Really a great experience. I was on a T32 training program. And followed by a traditional postdoctoral experience at the Forsyth Institute, one of the best institutes to do oral microbiology. My mission was to cure dental caries, but I don't think I succeeded. I enjoyed it thoroughly and quickly realized there are other areas of access to dental care that were a big barrier for many children and adults here in the US. I since then completed residency in pediatric dentistry, trying to become part of the solution, understanding this devastating disease clinically, severe childhood caries, and really enjoyed that experience. And after the residency in University of Maryland, did a 3-year clinical fellowship at NIDCR, a remarkable experience providing care for medically compromised children at the clinical center. And a unique opportunity to develop further my understanding of regulatory science by completing master's in clinical research from Duke Medical University. Fantastic experience. After that, I was in the nonprofit/industry space for 3 years, diving into big data, dentistry, and how the delivery system works. And that was followed by a 3-year period at the Food and Drug Administration, diving into clinical evaluation of safety and efficacy of drugs that make it to the US market. I loved every minute of it. Happy to talk to more of you about that. I don't think many people knew what the FDA was doing when I worked there, but after COVID, I think all of us have a better understanding. And there is a division of dermatology and dentistry there. And for the last 2 years, I've served as the Chief Dental Officer in the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services here in the Office of the Administrator. The first time this position was in the Office of the Administrator. and we provide health coverage for 160 million Americans. That's 1 in 2 Americans are touched by our programs. Happy to talk more. Thank you for letting me share my story and look forward to the discussion.
All right, thank you, Dr. Chalmers. Up next, Dr. Chibly.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Alex Chibly. I am a principal scientist in the Oncology Bioinformatics department at Genentech. I'm also the lead of what we call the reverse translation team and the oncology signaling part of it. Didn't do a great job before to explain what I do, so I'm gonna let me try again this session. So basically, what it means is that I work a lot with data that comes from clinical trials. What we try to do is apply some sophisticated machine learning methods, a lot of statistics, to predict how patients will respond to different kinds of treatments, and to also learn what are potential mechanisms of resistance to the drugs that we have. I focus primarily on hormone-driven cancer, so this is breast and prostate, and a lot of different molecules that are currently under development at Genentech. How I got here was a bit of a trek. I started my career at the University of Arizona, where I got my degree in cancer biology. And I was working with Dr. Christian Limisend, mostly focused on mechanisms of radiation-induced salivary dysfunction. So all the work that I did with her led me to conferences where a lot of the members of NIDCR will go to, so specifically the DRC in salivary gland biology. And that's where I met my postdoc mentor, Matt Hoffman, who until recently was the scientific director. When I was a postdoc, halfway through, maybe like a couple of years in, I transitioned from being 100% wet lab scientist to a bit more computational. And towards the end of my postdoc, driven a little bit because of the pandemic, I started thinking about what alternative paths there were to continue my career. And for context, I guess I started my career thinking I'm going to become a PI, I'm going to have a lab, I'm going to have grad students, postdocs, and so on, right, at a university. And that seemed a little less feasible when the pandemic started, because it took us a while to adjust to it. So deadlines for grant submissions didn't change immediately. We couldn't get preliminary data to support the grants because the lab was shut down. So eventually through LinkedIn, I connected with someone who worked at Genentech at the time and asked about this job that was posted, where they were looking for a cancer biologist that had some background in bioinformatics. And here I am. It's a non-traditional PI job where I have a smaller group. It works somewhat similar to a tenured position at a university with, there are lots of differences, but overall, I guess that the main similarity is that I get to do my own research, follow my own hypotheses, so long as they also adhere with the company's goals and business, right?
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Chibly. Dr. Fox.
Sure, pleasure to be here. So I'm Christopher Fox, and I'm the CEO of the International Association for Dental, Oral, and Craniofacial Research, and our American division is the American Association for Dental, Oral, and Craniofacial Research. And the way I ended up in this current position is I did go to dental school. I'm a dentist by training, so I went to Harvard School of Dental Medicine. I'm probably one of the few people that went to, well, there's probably a few more on this call here, but I went to dental school with zero intention of ever being a dentist. I just was interested in more the academic side than the clinical side. So I finished my dental school training, and then I did postdoctoral training in periodontology and oral epidemiology, as well as dental public health. And I was the beneficiary of a training grant that Harvard had at the time with University of Connecticut and Forsyth Institute on epidemiology. So they funded the what's called a DMSC, Doctor of Medical Sciences program in oral epidemiology. It was funded through NIDCR. So I really had a full intent of ending up in academia, more on the dental public health epidemiology side than on the perio side, although I did enjoy seeing patients. When I finished my training, I did not do a postdoc, and I would not recommend that to people. I think you should do a good postdoctoral program, but I started immediately in a faculty position, and my student loans started coming due, and then around the same time that my student loans came due, at that time you had a grace period from when you finished your training to when you had to start paying them back. I had a patient who was the president of a division of Colgate-Palmolive that was based in the Boston area called Colgate Oral Pharmaceuticals. And he offered me a position, and I was never interested in going into industry. Always thought I'd stay in academia my entire life. But then I did the math and saw what Harvard was paying me. It's a different institution now, but at the time it was not paying very much. What this industry job was paying me, and I realized I could pay my loans off and I could always go back to academia after I did that. So I went into industry. I ended up loving it, and I stayed there for 11 years, and a terrific company to work for. Sort of brought me around the world. I was initially based in the Boston area, but then in New York, and then my position became global in nature, so I traveled a lot, and then I switched positions and was based in London for 2 years, and then Paris for 2 years. So it was really a terrific opportunity. But it did start to get repetitive after a while. Again, it was a great company to work for, no regrets having been there. But then this position became open. Part of my responsibilities at Colgate was what our relationship was with various professional organizations. So I was very familiar with NIDCR, and the position for executive director came open. And I was approached by the search committee to apply for it, and I did, and I've been here ever since. So it's a little over 20 years. So I have, great training thanks to some NIDCR funding, and I use my perio and epidemiology and dental public health training all the time, but in a very different way, running a scientific association focused on dental, oral, and craniofacial research. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Fox. Okay, my turn. Like I said, I'm the chief of the Science Communication and Digital Outreach branch in NIDCR's Office of Communications. I lead a team whose job it is to publicize NIDCR's science via the NIDCR website, through social media, through liaisons with the news media. And I've been in the branch since 2017 when I joined as a science writer. And in that position, my job was essentially to translate NIDCR science into language that was accessible for the lay public. I've been in my current role as branch chief for going on 5 months now. Like several of the other panelists, NIDCR training sort of launched my career. I started out getting my feet wet in research as a postbac in NIDCR in a lab of Dr. Mitchell Max, who was studying the genetic underpinnings of pain, of chronic pain. And I really loved that experience. I especially loved the experience of being at NIH, where there was just so much fascinating, top-notch research going on and so many resources for learning and developing a career. So I just thought it was fantastic. It was a great experience. So from there, I went on to the University of Michigan to pursue a PhD in neuroscience. Again, my dissertation involved pain, specifically looking at the brain mechanisms underlying placebo-induced pain relief, or placebo analgesia. But along the way, I realized that I wasn't particularly interested in the tenure track life. I wasn't interested in grant writing. And so I started thinking about what else can I do with a PhD in neuroscience that is not, is not a traditional academic career. So Google was my best friend in those days. I turned to the internet to figure out what else people can do with PhDs. outside of academia. And one thing that stood out to me was science writing, because it seemed really interesting, because I was interested in learning about and communicating about a wide range of different scientific topics beyond my particular niche in neuroscience. And I also thought I was good at writing and that it could be a good fit. So at that point, I took a leap of faith and informed my dissertation mentor that I was interested in an alternative career, and that I wanted to start exploring and getting experience related to science writing to figure out if this was really what I wanted to do. To my pleasant surprise, he was supportive of that. And so I just really started looking for opportunities to just write, to just start contributing to various science related news outlets at my university, and taking a science writing boot camp to kind of learn from the pros and to network with science writers at all career stages. And so that really cemented my desire to pursue this field. But I went ahead and finished up my PhD. And after I finished it, I was accepted into a program at the National Cancer Institute called the Health Communications Fellowship Program, which is aimed for people with a master's or PhD in a scientific field who are interested in health and science communications. I worked for a year as a fellow in that program, as a science writer in a communications office at NCI, and that was where I really realized that I loved being at NIH, as I had when I was a postbac, and this was the career that I wanted to pursue, science writing at NIH.
That's okay. I just want to make sure that I'm on the CJ working on the right thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did I not send it to you? It's the one,
Yeah.
the most recent one from Rena.
Derek, could
So
you mute? Yeah. Okay. So where did I leave off? Yeah, so the fellowship at NCI. So after that fellowship was over, I got a job at a contractor that worked for NIH clients, providing science communications services. And so I worked as a science writer for several years, and then eventually was hired at NIDCR as a federal employee. So that's an overview of my career path. So wanted to thank each of the panelists for sharing their stories. Again, we have a nice variety of paths that we've taken, and it's really interesting to hear about each of your paths. So I thought we could now open up the session to questions and comments from our participants. Feel free to unmute and ask a question, or drop a question in the chat. So with that, I will open it up. I can actually start off with a question. My question is for Dr. Fox. You mentioned that, when you were in dental school, you didn't have an interest. You knew that you did not have an interest in working as a clinician. You were more interested in the research side of things. How common is that in dental school?
I don't think it's very common. And I can say that because now, as the CEO of AADOCR, we're trying to, encourage and do everything we can to increase the pathways into research careers. And that's one of the things we run up against, particularly when we're looking for clinical scientists, is most people go to dental school to become dentists, and they may do some research as part of their dental school, and if they do a residency, but that's not their primary interest. Our hope is that, between 1% and 5% of them, we can sort of switch something on, and they get the research bug and decide for a career in research. And then we offer some programs like our NIDCR funded Mind the Future program, where we help them make that transition into having a faculty career. So I don't think it's very common. At the time, Harvard School of Dental Medicine was a 5-year program, and it did tend to attract folks that were knew even when they're applying to dental school that they were interested in more than being a dentist. Most went into specialty, oral surgery, ortho, like is common now also, but also other careers in public policy, public health also.
And how did you navigate that at the time?
Well, it was a relatively small school at the time. I had 20 classmates, and now it's up to 35. And it's a wonderfully supportive environment where they really encouraged you, particularly in that 5th year, to explore other things that you may be interested in. So I did a year at the School of Public Health, and that was pretty typical of my classmates also, that they would go to School of Public Health. Linda Neeson, you may know, she was a few years ahead of me, but she's now the dean at KCU, College of Dental Medicine in Missouri. And when she had her 5th year, she went to the Kennedy School. I think she was one of the few dental school folks that went to the Kennedy School of Government. So all sorts of opportunities, and it was a supportive environment to encourage that. You're also, those that were interested in basic science and biomedical research, you're there at the medical school campus of Harvard with all the teaching hospitals like Brigham and Women and Mass General Hospital. So a lot of my colleagues did research at those institutions also.
Mm-hmm. And what about Dr. Chibly and Dr. Chalmers? Did you guys ever at any point encounter a supportive environment like that, where you were encouraged to seek out non-traditional career paths?
I think for me personally, I think it was until I decided that I wanted to look for it. I think the option was there. I don't know, from when I was in grad school, I remember having symposiums like this one, but I was never interested, right? That was on me. I rarely attended the career development workshops where they were focused outside of academia until it, in my mind, I guess something clicked and it became a more realistic possibility that I would go to industry. Once I did that, I mean, yes, luckily I had mentors who were really helpful in guiding me and giving me their opinion, at least, on what it was like to transition.
I think when you start on this is at least my experience, on the PhD journey or, dental scientist, I think we drink a little bit of the Kool-Aid, that, there is one path forward until you see that there, really success can be redefined. Every career can be successful inside and outside of academia. But to your question, I don't think any of the mentors said, oh, invest this time in a PhD and a postdoctoral and then go and do an alternative career. No, they were supportive in other ways, but I think, the vision always and the mantra was, what's the next grant? Is it, you learn the alphabet, is it a K? Which one of the Ks? Which one of the Rs? So, and I think that's challenging for mentors, because they, obviously, some of them have invested a lot of their careers in academia. They want to see their, mentees become successful, and may or may not think of alternative careers as success. And I think that's something we just need to have a very honest discussion of how you define success. In the end of the day, this is your life. You get to define the milestones and the successes, and how you think about a successful career. And it's great when there is support for it. But I would say more often than not, in an academic environment, there is no support for alternative careers.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit in the last session about how it can be daunting to bring up to your mentor that you want to explore something other than the academic path. Can you each talk a little bit about how you broach the topic with your mentor? and what that was like for you.
Yeah, I think it was very daunting, but it wasn't necessarily the approaching any of my mentors with the question that was daunting. I think it was just more personally letting go, like Dr. Chalmers was talking about, letting go of the idea of what it means to succeed in a certain career path. And once I kind of got over that idea, right, that if I started considering alternative career paths, I could still be successful, I approached it very nonchalantly. I was just having a meeting about something else with her, and just asked, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I don't have more preliminary data for my grant, so I'm starting to think maybe it's time to look for something else. But how do you know when is the right time to do that? And her response was, when you have a job offer. Yeah, so that just got me to start looking for what was out there.
Yeah, I also had a very honest discussion with my mentor. He was very supportive in a traditional PhD postdoc way. Let me build on his network. I would recommend that you have good relationship with mentors and ask to tap into their network. But the conversation was very straightforward. It's like, what is it that you want to do? And when they open that door, you have to be very, very honest. What is it that you truly aspire? And at the time, I knew for me it was to be able to be part of the solution and become part of the provider network to address these oral health disparities that I was seeing left and right, that were not driven by lack of innovation, but lack of providers. And he said, okay, we'll do that. We'll go get a license. And I did. And it's opened so many doors for me. I think for dentist scientists, it's always the challenge of how do you keep both, can you do both? I was in practice until before COVID. So it's possible, but I would say in some environments, it's more possible than others. If you're asked to do full-time clinical practice as a clinical faculty and write grants on Friday afternoon and the weekend, that's not sustainable, right? So I think there is just a real honest discussion of what your role is and what you're expected to do and how much time you can allocate to each one of these. But getting my clinical training was absolutely a phenomenal experience, and I couldn't do my job today without it. So that's how critical it is. And every step of the way has made a big impact. Training, networking, all of it.
So I've been asking most of the questions. Wanted to make sure that people in the audience have a chance to ask questions if they'd like. Is there anyone who'd like to has a comment or a question? Or one of the panelists? Okay.
I think it would be great if we could hear from the trainees, what's on their minds if they're considering. I'm guessing they're considering a career outside of traditionally going to academia if they're on the session, but it would be good to hear, is there anything that you're afraid of or that you think it's really daunting, or what are the challenges, right? Give us a prompt and then maybe we can talk about it.
I can speak about the challenges that come up even with the things that were talked about here when we were hearing, like getting the mentors validation or feedback like that, you get, the approvals, then you feel comfortable pursuing, or even giving ourselves permission to explore and navigate careers that is more of a less charted territory, right? So we're so used to kind of going through the educational linear path. And then when you think of something that's not as common, a lot of times I hear people are afraid of, well, what are they going to think of me? Of course, we know that it's just about what do we think of ourselves. or the uncertainty of what could that path look like and what if I fail. So I know a lot of times those things come up, and it's so nice to have mentors here who can give us some insights about what it looks like on the other end. But just to kind of bring up some of those inner voices that come to mind that I anticipate some other people are having as well.
That's
Yeah,
a great,
and I think we talked about that in the last session, didn't we?
yeah, I was just gonna say the same thing. A great comment, Jillian, and we talked about making sure you have mentors beyond your own institution. And, you know, going to scientific meetings is one way where you can find mentors in your field, but at other institutions, but seeking a broad range of input. And back to your original questions, I had, when I first went from academia to industry, you know, I had a couple of mentors that were very supportive, but I also had, you know, the dean of my dental school not supportive and said some rather unkind things of, you know, going to the dark side, and a couple of other faculty members like that. And I guess that's part of life. You're not gonna please everybody, but if you can please yourself and a few of your mentors, and that's great. But seek broad input as you are embarking on your careers.
Yeah, I just want to add, you know, when I was taking the position of dental officer in the Food and Drug Administration, and this is before COVID. Again, I think there was a big shift in people's understanding of what the FDA did. But someone, you know, from the world of dental academia straight out looked at me and said, "Oh, what a waste of time." Like, you know, so people have different perception and understanding of what you're embarking on or what your contribution is. And if it's someone you respect, it's really hard to ignore a comment like this, right? But then you just have to move on and you own it. You know, you own every part of your journey. You make it the best that it can be. And you make your contributions as valuable as they can be. Like, I really would encourage us to, you know, chart your own path forward. If your mentor could be there to be along the way and supportive and be part of that journey, that's great. If they're not, you really are in charge of your destiny. And in a sense, I have shared this in the previous session. Sometimes the things we don't get are the biggest blessing. I can't tell you, you know, how many times this has become true in my career. You think you want this, you know, grant or this award, and you know, it just there were other plans that were bigger and brighter and more amazing. So own it. And it's hard, especially when the narrative is that everything else but an R01 is a failure. Just forget it. I mean, I know R01s are great, but that is not how you define your value or your contribution to the world. There are plenty of people doing amazing things who've never had an R01.
There were also, you know, a couple of things, Jillian, in your question that I think you just hit the nail, right? One of them, the concept of this linear path, right? And then what do you do when you move on to this uncharted territory? It's like the unknown, right? The reality is that it's not completely unknown. And I'm actually also just reading one of the questions in the messages, right? How does the conventional PhD or postdoc prepares individuals for, let's say, industry? It does prepare you, right? I mean, it's all science. We all are critical thinkers, and we acquire a lot of skills through our training that are easily transferable to this new role. The other part of your question that I think is really key is how do we give ourselves permission, right, to do the jump? Because it's really all about that. It's giving ourselves permission, trusting that we can do something else, right? And that we have the ability to do it. And also redefining, like we were mentioning before, what it means to be successful in our career, in the career that we're choosing for ourselves, right? And so part of it is just that mental exercise that is very personal, of making the decision, yes, I think it's time for a change. What does that change look like? And then go from there.
Yeah, and adding on to that, I think that persistence is key. If you have decided that, you know, you are passionate about following a new career trajectory, keep going. You know, you might encounter along the way people who say negative things, but you know, like others have said, believe in yourself and just don't give up. I mean, there will be opportunities that you don't get. But like Dr. Chalmers said, those can be just as informative and learning experiences as the opportunities you do get. And I have found that persistence, keeping going, whether you are failing or not, is really key into eventually getting to where you want to be.
And there's a great question in the chat from Aziz Alade. And Alex, I think you touched on some of this also, but Aziz is asking about the research environment in industry and whether it's similar to academia. And I should say it's the award-winning Aziz Alade. He won our Smile Train Award. And you have a great mentor. I know Aziz Butali at the University of Iowa also. He's like a role model for mentors. But in terms of, industry is looking for PhDs, strong PhDs like Alex and others. If you think of the research pathway going from clinical to clinical translational, that's obviously through industry. And you're not going to have the same independence as you would in a career in academia, but it's also a very rewarding career to be in industry. You don't have to write grants, but you certainly have to, defend what you're going to be spending the company's money on and, answering to quote unquote shareholder value. But Alex, you're currently in a industry position, and probably in a better position than my 20-year-old memory of when I was in industry to address that question.
Okay, I can answer in two different ways. Genentech is a bit of a unicorn in that it does have research that is very, very similar to how it works in academia, right? We have a very academic mindset. We still focus on publications. Group leads like myself have some degree of independence to explore other areas. But of course, one big requisite of everything that we do is that it has to relate to the company's business, right, in one way or another. So, but hopefully, right, if you're searching for a job in industry, it's also a job that you want to do and it's something that you're interested in, right? So that it fits within your passions of what you're interested in. The one of the bigger differences or the bigger challenges for myself when I transitioned to industry was specifically because it's in a biotech company and we work with clinical trials. It's learning all everything that happens in the clinic that I wasn't used to, right? How is a clinical trial designed and all of the considerations that go into how do we define if a trial is positive or negative, and what samples are we going to collect and why are we going to collect them? What are we going to analyze? What are the questions that we're trying to address? There's a lot of jargon that comes with it that as a PhD, I also wasn't familiar with, but all of that you learn within the first couple of months in the job, right? And the research itself, and again, the critical thinking, that's all the same, right? So we just have to get the one job that we are interested in. Hopefully you're doing something that you want to do, right? When you get up in the morning, you're happy about it. Hopefully that answers at least some of that, some of the question.
Yeah, it does. I was just curious about what options is available and all that. So I'm currently doing my clinical fellowship at the NIDCR. So yeah, I just wanted to know because so back when I was in my dental school, I used to work with some toothpaste company back in Nigeria. And so what I was doing then was just to help them write a proposal for us to do like a community outreach. So that was what I used to do and then get that. So, and that was one of the motivation I had to actually pursue public health. And then I found myself in epidemiology. Then I eventually did genetic epidemiology. And now I'm doing, a couple of basic research, but I'm more into doing genetics of craniofacial defect and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I was just thinking about how I started and then thinking of, because I think, I'm not sure if a lot of people still work with companies here, like you have some academia, because I was still in my dental school, but I used to work with some of those dental companies to get data, and then we do publish what we found in the community when we go for outreaches like that. So yeah, so that, I don't know if there are opportunities like that, because I think that's something I enjoyed doing on weekends when I was back in Nigeria.
the other industry also to look at for some of the folks on the call would also be the dental insurance industry. And I know Natalie had a history in that also. So, they have all the data, and if you have some, big data questions, and they are hiring PhDs and looking at the data that they're collecting, ideally a company that might have a connection to overall health data also. So you're not just looking at dental records, but you're looking at the entire electronic health record, and some fascinating research that's coming out of those industries. If you're into data science and big data, to be looking at the dental companies and the research that they're doing.
Yeah, I would just pitch in for all the state oral health leads. So again, in Medicaid, we have a federal state partnership where the state administers a program with some broad federal guidelines. But you will have a lot of opportunity to advance the health policy at the state level if you're at the table. So everyday decisions are made of how to spend millions and millions of dollars. And there's so many states where we just don't have a chief dental officer or chief oral health program lead. And there you will absolutely use your clinical skills and practice every day, making important decisions around coverage, access to specialists. So understanding big data is a must in all of these positions. Good clinical skills. Data is the new healthcare system. Sort of how to say the health data is the new currency of our system, and I think this is where you really need to become very comfortable with data analytics. If it's something you can do, get trainings for it. You don't want to be relying on a statistician to be giving you regression models and you wondering like, what on earth does that mean? I'm not saying you're going to do all of the data analytics, but you need to be very comfortable interpreting that data. And it came in very handy when I was at FDA, where you're looking at clinical trials and you're making a decision if this drug is safe and effective to be on the US market. Like there are consequences of some of these decisions that impact human lives. And so I would just say we have to become as comfortable with data as we are with the 2 millimeter proximal prep on tooth number 19. I mean, this is the future of dentistry.
My preps were always in centimeters, not millimeters. That's why I left.
I love it. Defining quality. I mean, we can talk a lot about where we have such opportunities in dentistry, but data, quality improvement, quality measurement, you need to be at the table when these things are discussed.